Start by welcoming everyone to our Giving Traditions event. We chose this topic so that we could celebrate some different approaches to giving. And we're really just so happy that you all could join us. I'm Tom Griffith. I'm the Vice President of Development here at the Community Foundation. And we're going to introduce our speakers as we talk to them. And that's actually the beginning part of this is going to be, we're going to walk through our speaker panelists and spend a few minutes with each of them. And then we'll open up the room to a discussion and question and answer kind of period after that. So if you want to sit back and relax and mute yourself for right now, and we will begin. I'll just briefly tell you who the speakers are, but then we'll go into a little more detail as we talk to each of them. So we have Steve and Elaine Jacobs with us today. We have Mark and Carla Hall. We have Vicki Brackens, and we have Andrea Waldman. So Monica, who's our Senior Director of Philanthropic Services, she's going to be monitoring the chat box during this time. So if you have a question and you don't want to lose track of it, feel free to just pop that in the chat. And then we'll be able to address those as we get to the discussion part of the event. That would be great. So let's get started, and I'll start with Steve and Elaine. So Steve and Elaine opened their fund with the Community Foundation back in 1987. And in addition to being fund holders, Steve and Elaine are members of our Legacy Society. Steve also served on our board from 2012 to 2018. And so I'll let them add any additional details that they want to share as part of their bio. And let me just start by saying welcome to Steve and Elaine. So,
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think we have anything to add.
Okay. Well, like all the rest of the...
We need an aspirational office behind us, like your aspirational kitchen.
Yes, my aspirational kitchen, not my real kitchen. So
this is our real office.
Yeah, so like the other panelists, you're best friends of the Community Foundation. And, in preparing for today, one of the things that you both mentioned was that, your philosophy around giving really didn't come together at once. It was something that evolved. And I just was wondering if you could just take a couple minutes to talk about or describe that evolution. So.
Well, I can start. I think when we started, as you look at the foundation and the different funds that are at the foundation, sometimes you feel compelled to try to find something to focus on. And I think that acted almost as an obstacle to us in terms of reaching our philosophy, because we couldn't land on anything. And our philosophy evolved probably over 5 to 7 years. And when we started to do a legacy plan, we met with Jen Owens, and we had a couple conversations, and Jen captured our thinking in a memorandum. And it sat there for a long time. And then Elaine and I would talk over time. And a couple things became clear to us, that there were things that were important to Elaine and me in terms of the needs in the community today, with a lot of people not having the assets we have, but I think we both found that people are the same throughout, having the same desires for the success of their families and their children and so on.
And we see just how fortunate we are that we are able to provide for ourselves of what we need: food, clothing, housing, do what we want to do. But we do see in the community, especially right now this past year, where there are so many needs of so many people that can't do that for themselves. And we just want to especially this year, really address those needs and look at it right down to right where it hurts the most, where there's the hunger in the community. How can we address that? And just all of the different ways. And children, children are very special to me, and to see ways that children are impacted through this. How can we help the children? And so I'm kind of talking with Steve about that, of how do we address
over the years
of this. And so that for me is where my focus is, and where I've talked to Steve a lot about, is about children, and children that don't have the opportunities of children that we have, our grandchildren, but how do we help reach some of these children?
So I think you can hear in Elaine's passion. We didn't prepare for this, but in Elaine's passion is what affected me. I was always involved in community activities like the Y and junior achievement at the board level, and Elaine's passion gets down to the grassroots. So that really affected me and my thinking. And I think the other thing that affected us, we've both been involved in organizations that have changed in the last 15 years. Elaine was very involved with Coleman and was chairperson of the board. And you've seen Coleman change dramatically in the last 15 years. I was involved in junior achievement and scouting. And those two organizations have dramatically changed, as you all know, in the last 10 or 15 years, and have had challenges. What that did to us, it dawned on us that how can we project 50 years from now what the needs of a community are going to be, when our own experiences with organizations we've been involved in have evolved themselves and the needs have changed. So our philosophy, and one of the later questions is about.
I was going to say that's a really good segue to how you came up with the way you're planning your fund, after you're gone.
Yeah, and Tom posed that to us, and you can see the evolution took place over years, because it became clear we couldn't focus on one thing, because that one thing or that need or that mission may not even exist 100 years from now. And so we came to the conclusion that what we wanted to do was just leave that decision making in the hands of an organization we trusted, which of course is the Central New York Community Foundation, and trusting that there will be people like the people on the screen today who will be there 50 and 100 years from now to make the right decisions using our assets to serve the needs of the community that we care so much about.
Yeah, so your donor advised fund that's very flexible now and allows you to support whatever is important to you. And as you talked about, those things change. It becomes a community fund, after you're gone, and that, like you said, will support changing needs over time. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about how your board service may have, impacted your perspective on charitable giving? You were a board member here not very long ago. You still are on our development committee. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
First, I need to comment on the chain that's connected to the desk here that won't let me leave the organization. But
fair.
It's aspirational that I can get outside one of these days. But yeah, that's probably when I encourage anyone who's interested in our community to get involved with the foundation. And I do this on a regular basis. Recently with Mike Meath, who's now on the board of the foundation. And, I talked to Mike about my experience, and he joined the board not too long ago. I think how it affected me is I brought home to Elaine my observations about the breadth and variety of the needs in the community. And one thing that a board member does is rotate through the grants committee. So at least once a year, a board member who is, and like myself, who was not on the grants committee, rotates through the grants committee. And when you do that, you get to see the breadth and the variety of needs, but also you get to see the detail and depth to which the grants committee vets potential grantees. And that gave me a lot of comfort. That process gave me a lot of comfort to bring home and talk to Elaine about the thoroughness with which the foundation stewards the monies. So it was a combination of feeling that we can't project where the needs are going to be because there's such a variety, and the fact that the foundation and the grants committee are so careful in stewarding the funds. So that's how it affected me.
Thanks. I know you guys have a lot more to share, and so we're going to move on to the next panelist at this point, and we'll come back to the discussion after we get through each panelist. So Monica?
Sure thing. Next, we'd like to introduce Mark and Carla Hall. Mark and Carla started a fund back in 2017, but really they've been connected to the Community Foundation for a long, long time. They reached out to us back when they were fundraising for the Kirk Park Youth Football and Cheerleading Program, which they established back when Peggy Ogden was heading up the foundation. And Peggy is here someplace in one of my squares today. Interesting, what some of my favorite elements of the Hall story is that Mark is originally from Syracuse. And he and Carla met while they were attending Bradley University near in Illinois, near Carla's hometown of Chicago. And they chose to make their home in central New York. And the Halls are big believers in building a strong community by giving back. And their generosity and their mentorship of other people is really evidence in that. So we've got a couple questions for them, and Mark and Carla, if you'd like to unmute yourselves, I'll get going with a couple prompts to help you tell your story. Wondering if you could think back to when you were growing up, because I know in our conversations you shared a lot about how your family history has informed your giving today. What sort of messages did you hear about giving back that still stick with you today?
Hello, everyone. It's more better to give than it is to receive. We like to receive, but that's what I grew up with. And that's what sticks with me, that the more you give, the more you receive. And that's what what holds on to me when I start to want to hold it tight to close to me and says, oh, let me just keep it for myself. And it's just like, no, it's better to give than it is to receive. And in giving, it makes me just feel, I don't think people really know. My questions, I'm like the Jacobs, it's not rehearsed, it's my passion. I don't mind giving because I love to do that. I love to see the faces and all that good stuff. But what keep me there, Monica and everyone, is that I didn't come from great means. So with that being said, knowing how to give from my mother, showing me how my grandfather and my family, and I see my uncles give and my aunts give, and my family, just a family of giving, it just stayed with me. That's mine.
So first of all, I'm looking for Peg. I don't see, she must be on another screen. Hi, Peg, wherever you are. But
hi, Peg. We love you.
So
for good to see you both.
There you
are. So for me, growing up in Syracuse, my parents, it's similar to Carla. You know, my parents, they were not well off financially. As I say, you know, we didn't know that we were poor as children, because, you know, what we had was a rich life.
Right.
And I saw my parents both my mother and father give, primarily through their church. And they, people will come to dinner on a regular basis. People will come to our house and stay for months that were in need. And so I saw that even at an early age that you didn't have to have a lot to give. And so that really set the foundation for me. And obviously once Carla and I, once we got married, Monica, as you mentioned, we started the Pop Warner there on the south side of Syracuse over 30 years ago. And that really for us, for Carla and I, really was a ministry because we affected folks' lives, or at least that's what our intentions were, that went well beyond football and cheerleading. We got to know the parents, and we would see what the needs were, not just the physical needs, but the spiritual and mental needs, mental health needs. And as much as we could point them in directions of to be able to receive the assistance that they needed and their families needed, their children, when it came to schoolwork, we would go to the schools. And we would go to the homes, and we knew that there was need. And so as much as we could be that conduit is what we attempted to do.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like your inspirations for giving not only came from your upbringing, but from all around you, what you saw in friends and neighbors. That's incredible. If you what are some issues in our community that you wish that you could just wave a magic wand and fix right away, and why?
So I'll talk about this first. So Carla and I have what we call Bill Gates moments. If we were Bill Gates and had those type of financial resources, what would we do? Obviously, a magic wand is a little different approach, but we have these conversations, similar conversations on a regular basis. And we realize that we're not Bill Gates and Bill and Melinda Gates, but that we have means. And so therefore, that's why we went to establish the fund through the community foundation. But I would say for me personally, it would be poverty. Poverty reaches its hands into so many parts of people's lives, not just the financial aspects, but the personal and the interpersonal, in the sense of community, schooling. We talk about in my profession as social determinants of health. And what I often like to say that there are social determinants that reach into so many different areas of education, of health, of finances, of being able to provide work. So I would say for me, it would be, something I could talk on for on and on, but I would say for me, it would be poverty.
How about you, Carla?
Mine would be on the same sort of, the poverty mentality. If I could change that, I would change that. I would change the, let's do it as a financial area. I would redo all the buildings. I can't stand them. I'm from Chicago, and I'm from the middle section of Chicago. I'm not from the South. I'm not from the West. I'm Southwest. I'm from Southwest. So I'm in the middle. So I had a variety of different types of lifestyles and different flavors of life and different types of people all around me all the time. Like I said to you before, Monica, I came from I went to a Jewish high school. So, and I did all these kinds of things. So I've been well versed with different types of people. But if I had to want in Syracuse, what I would do, the health area, the hospitals, the health center, I would redo it. I would make them nice and let the people be able to want to come to something nice. When something looks good, when something looks clean, people are more apt to come and get the help that they need. If it's not welcome doesn't look welcoming and it doesn't look, presentable, like you gave it some thought, it's hard to come with your mentality like that, not having, like I says, I grew up going to clinics. We call it the clinics. You call it the health center. Going to clinics, and it was always nice. And they kept it dated. They kept it dated, and that makes a big difference. And people then would come in and get the help that they need, their teeth done, their examinations. They would come more willingly than they do now. Our health center looks atrocious. I would change it.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I know that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I did want to ask you about the way that you've planned for your fund. When you opened your fund at the Community Foundation, one of the questions we asked you was, what do you want this fund to do when you're no longer here to advise on it, when you're no longer here to make grants from it? And you elected to name your children as successor advisors. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that?
Because we knew how we raised them. we raised them in an atmosphere of giving. They saw it on a regular basis, and they lived it from day to day. And there's a balance when it comes to that, when you want to make sure that you're paying attention and meeting the needs of your immediate family, your children, your spouse, prior to giving to other folks. Because if you don't have that foundation, then what you build will fall and it will crumble. So we know that our two children are very level-headed, and they understand the importance of giving. They understand the importance of giving to communities and people in need, but also being able to identify those areas that would have the greatest impact for the limited dollars that we have. So that was part of the reason. I don't know, was there something else?
No, that was mainly it. They have their level head, they're balanced, they understand their surroundings. So, and they understand their surroundings, and by them growing up in Syracuse and us starting in being grassroots in Kirk Park on the South Side, they grew up in that. So they grew up in knowing that you have to get your hands dirty. You have to be compassionate when you don't have, when others don't have. You have to be able to establish that relationship with giving without making people feel like they're inadequate themselves. So my children, they understand that.
That's incredible. Well, we look forward to working with them years down the road, or maybe not so long down the road if they decide they want to talk to us beforehand. But that's I love that part of your story, and I'm excited that you're engaging your family in your fund. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Tom, who's up next?
So Vicki Brackens is next, and so she's been engaged with the Community Foundation, I think, in almost every way possible. So she's a fund holder. She's a financial advisor who has connected her clients with us when they need help with charitable planning. She's a former board member and a member of our Legacy Society. And so, welcome, Vicki. And one thing I just want to start with is just noting that your fund is structured a little differently than the other panelists. And your fund that you created, during your life here is called a Field of Interest Fund, and it supports innovation and entrepreneurship. And it's actually administered through our community grant making process. And so I just wanted to put that out there first. And also, in case you don't know Vicki, you probably recognize her from her feature on the Syracuse Woman magazine back in November. And so anyway, welcome, Vicki. So
Thanks a lot, Tom. And it's been really, and to everyone who's online and to the other panelists, it's been very interesting to listen to the different perspectives that we all have, but we have one common theme, and that is a love and caring for Central New York. You know, you mentioned that I was on the board, and it seems like a long time ago now. Okay. In fact, we were part. I was on the board at the time as at one point in time. I think I started out with Peggy as the president, and then Peter. We were there on South Salina Street at the time. Okay, there in the tower. It was our honor to actually. And at the time, I think Ann Messenger was the board chair, and I was the foundation financial over the finance committee for us to make the recommendation to move to the facility that we have now during the time period when we had one of the greatest at that time financial crises ahead of us, because the financial crisis was right on top of us when we made that decision.
It's
But
2008. Wow.
2008, yeah, that long ago, and I had been on the board for a couple of years before that. So, but being on the board shaped my perspective for charitable giving and exactly what could be done through collective, what I would say collective philanthropy versus individual philanthropy, and that's really where I started to look at the community foundation's function a lot differently. I think there is, unfortunately, at that time, more so than now, a misunderstanding of what the Community Foundation's perspective and place in society was. We spent a lot of time trying to change that perception. And as we went through those conversations, I began to really feel a much greater connection to the mission of the foundation and how it could, if we all work together, continue to empower the community at large. So when I think it was just as we were leaving, as I was transitioning off, there was an opportunity there to make us a gift to the foundation, to the Community Foundation, along with some of the naming rights that were taking place, okay, for certain things around the foundation's new building. And it dawned on me that for me to really hammer home long-term my belief in what the foundation was doing, and to give a concrete example to others in the community that they could get involved, I needed to step up. And that's really one of the things that pushed me, because you can talk about things a lot, and you can go out and tell everyone about how great something is, but until you make a concrete step, you don't provide the example. And particularly in the African American community, which has not at that time really engaged with the Community Foundation to any great level, I felt it my responsibility to do that. I chose the Field of Interest Fund rather than a donor advised fund, although I've used donor advised funds in other capacities, but the Field of Interest Fund for the Community Foundation, because I wanted to also make a statement around a gap space that I thought the Community Foundation and this fund could provide, and that was around entrepreneurship and technology, and creating a funding source for new entrepreneurs, particularly new entrepreneurs of color, who would have a way of getting that first, and I'm going to call it tiny seed, not even seed, tiny seed of appreciation or congratulations, because someone had listened to their idea, found value in it, and now would take the steps of funding that idea so that they could do the next step of research and development, et cetera. Because you hear all the time that one of our primary issues within entrepreneurial capacity within our minority communities is lack of funding, lack of capital for that first step. And I at the time I was developing a gaming system, and I do this as a living. I can tell you how intimidating it is to walk into a room of venture capitalists, present an idea which is dear to your heart and to your soul, and not know if they're going to say yes or no. And if you don't get enough yeses early enough, an idea can die on the vine that might change the world. And so I said, let's create a fund that at least provided a seed faith endeavor into entrepreneurs who had ideas that needed that first yes, just needed that first yes to create that momentum and move forward. I chose the Community Foundation to do this though, because I don't have enough eyes singularly to go out and scope for the best ideas or scope for the individuals that would benefit most, not only individually, but could move and spread those ideas throughout a community. And I knew I could trust the Community Foundation, and I knew the financial backing, because I was over the finance committee. I had seen internally what a great job this organization does. So that was the reason that I chose to do so. Yeah. And I'm glad I did. And I will keep working on it so we can grow it from a tiny seed to maybe an acorn going forward. And might end up with a tree one day, but right now, that was the primary reason for doing so.
So
I know you asked me. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the people that don't get to be finance committee chair and see the details and own that, like, how do you talk about that? Like, how do you talk about it with clients, the idea of charitable giving, or do you just share your example, or how do you do that?
Sure. The first thing is and I have no problems, and I love doing it, sharing the story, okay, of my progression through the Community Foundation and what we did with the fund. But I'm always looking for those kernels of opportunity for conversation with clients. As we're developing financial plans for them, you can always look at what a person is currently doing and see that there is a vein of philanthropy running through their current finances, or listen to the passion that they have around certain things. They may say something like, I really love to make sure that the kids in my neighborhood can do X, Y, Z. They are involved with community. And so that's a good time to start at least a conversation around, what are your long range plans? Have you ever considered doing something more substantial? Have you ever, do you know that you can, even though most people believe that you need, I say it this way, you need a pile of money to get started. You don't necessarily need a pile. You need an intent and a mission and a structure that will allow you to build toward that pile of money in the future. So you look for the opportunities for the conversations around that.
Thank you so much, Vicki. I look forward to continuing to explore that as we get into the discussion part. So I'll turn it back over to Monica.
Thanks, Tom. Our final panelist is Andrea Waldman. Andrea's family has a long history with the Community Foundation. Her father, Frank Borer, was the president of Express Mart shops and established a fund in 1997 to provide educational scholarships for the company's employees and their families. Frank and Patricia Borer's children have continued that tradition of partnering with the Community Foundation to facilitate their charitable giving through donor advised funds. And Andrea and her husband, Josh, are deeply committed to helping their friends and their neighbors, and have begun engaging their daughters even in some of the grant making from their fund that they established here. So thanks for joining us, Andrea. I'm glad you're here. I thought I'd start our conversation with a couple questions, if that's all right with you.
Yep.
So for you, thinking similar to what we asked Mark and Carla, thinking back to growing up and in your family dynamic, what were the messages that you got about giving?
I mean, growing up, my mother was so involved in the community, and she found so much purpose in volunteering and giving back. And she was on committees and chaired committees and ran events all over town, from our schools to Syracuse Stage to Make-A-Wish, to all over the place. My father used to joke that she would do anything that didn't give her a W-2. So she really took a lot of pride in that. And it was easy to see how fulfilled she was from doing that. And as you said, my father started the scholarship fund for his employees, mostly because he saw that as, you know, something that he could help with and something that was very important to him. Education was extremely important to him. And then after we sold Express Mart stores, we transitioned that scholarship fund to a field of interest fund. So it continues to live on and provide scholarships and money for secondary education.
Mhm. Yeah, that was a really neat conversation to have with your family, talking about changing a fund that was one model to another model, but still preserve that intent. And it was kind of fun. It was neat to talk through ideas and hear, you know, from you and your brothers and sisters about what you wanted it to be. So to return to a question that we've asked some of our other panelists, what are some of the issues in our community that you wish you could wave a magic wand or give the Gates treatment and and solve right away?
I look at the disparities in our community as a true pain point in be it financial, educational access to food, healthcare. It's not something that, you know, that you can really wave a magic wand and do. I think the magic wand for me would take away that perception of, well, you know, if everybody worked really hard, they could all have the same outcomes. And that's just not the case. And we've just seen it over and over again that not everybody starts from the same starting line. So how do we make it more equitable, more access to education and even just the basics such as food and medical care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was lucky enough a couple years ago to meet with you and your daughters and Josh. And can you talk a little bit about how you engage your girls in giving? They're both younger, but we had some really great conversations, and I love how you and Josh approached that. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yes. So our daughters are 10 and 12, soon to be 11 and 13. And we have been talking about this with them for a few years. We started with the message that Carla mentioned earlier was, you know, it's better to give than receive. And by giving, you get so much back. And we actually named our fund the Echo Fund for that very reason, because when whatever you put out there comes back to you, and you get so much fulfillment from putting out into the community and helping in the community. And the conversation with them was very interesting about, you know, what their interests are, what they're grateful for, and turning that to be, you know, not everybody has that opportunity, not everybody has what we have. So focusing on the gratitude and then wanting other people to have that same feeling or that same opportunity. And we empower them each year to give a portion of our fund. They decide where it goes. And they've chosen Vera House, Food Bank of Central New York, and Arise over the last years. And of course, they each choose separately because we would not make them actually agree on where it went. So we give them each. But we also, when they give, we ask the places that they're giving to respond to them and tell them what that money is used for and what differences it can make to the people in their community, so they can really see the effect.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that surprised you when you started having family conversations about giving that you weren't expecting?
I wasn't expecting. Our oldest daughter chose Vera House the first year she chose to donate. And that was not a surprise. She has some friends whose parents work there, so and is familiar with the work that they do. So I was not surprised. I was surprised that she changed to the food bank of CNY this year, and it really made me think that she is listening and paying attention to all of the sudden need or greater need for food during the pandemic.
That's great. Well, you're doing something right there, Andrea. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all our panelists. We wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So please feel free to send questions in the chat, and I'll make sure to read those aloud to our panelists. But I also wanted to invite our speakers, if there's anything else that you thought of, maybe just from listening to each other, that prompted you to want to add to something that you said before.
You asked earlier, I didn't quite finish answering about the magic wand. And I thought about that for a long time and decided that if I had a magic wand, I would actually try and change the level of empathy within our community. And a lot of times we look at empathy as being something around how we handle individuals or handle situations that are for those who are less privileged. But I'm saying empathy across the board. When I first moved to Syracuse, I was involved in, that was almost 28 years ago. I was involved with interfaith works, and they had circles around conversations around race relations. That was actually 30 now, I think about 30 years ago. We still are sitting in the same place, which makes no sense to me. And so when I say empathy, if we could figure out a way to create spaces that allowed us to be very honest, I mean, really safe places where we could have honest conversations about the things that, and perspectives and opinions that we have, and almost flesh them out, very much like they did there in South Africa in the Truth and Reconciliation process, we would be in so much better shape.
Mm-hmm.
We've got so many things on our hearts that we don't allow others to express because we're afraid to say so. And then once they're in the air, we can deal with them. But otherwise they fester and become the hurtful situations that we have today. So empathy across the board.
Are there, Vicki, could I ask you a follow-up question about that? Are there organizations or causes or movements or people that you've seen either locally or across the country that are fulfilling what you're talking about, that are touching that chord and making progress that you'd like to see us mimic here?
I wish I could give you an absolute go find this one in Kansas City, bring it here and drop it down into Syracuse. The closest that I know of is I just referenced, which was when Nelson Mandela and Reverend Tutu, Bishop Tutu, excuse me, put together the Truth and Reconciliation Council to allow everybody in a safe area. They knew that and it wasn't perfect because South Africa still has problems, but it was a start, probably one of the best starts that I've seen. Interfaith Works, when I came here, and I don't know, I haven't spoken to them in a while, at least maybe had a framework, but it wasn't quite as safe as it needed to be, because even participating, I knew that people were holding back. They were holding back, okay, as far as the things that they wanted to say, because until we get everything out on the table, we're just going to pack it in and try and work around the edges and incremental change. And we are in a place now in the country, in the world, but particularly in the country, where incremental change will no longer work.
Mm-hmm.
Or we stay where we are. We keep continuing to spin in the same circles. and I got a lot of gray hair. I put the hat on so you wouldn't see it. I don't have much more time to figure this for us to figure this out. Right, Mark, we started out together. We had lots of black hair, didn't we? Okay.
Were there any other panelists that didn't get a chance to answer that question about the persistent problem or the problem they wish they could change right away? I'm not sure if Elaine and Steve got a chance to address that or not, but feel free to chime in if that's something you'd like to talk about too.
Could you repeat that? I was
Sure, the magic wand question. I'm sorry, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I wasn't sure if you got a chance to answer it in the way that you wanted to, like our other panelists did. If there's an issue in our community that you wish that you could solve right away and just make go away, what would that be?
Well, I think Elaine and I feel the same about that subject, and that is that we just wish people would think more about other people instead of themselves. I think what I've seen, I was just 76, and I think back in my youth, I think people spent more time thinking about others than they do today. So that's one thing. And related to that gets into the whole issue of funding philanthropy, because from what I've seen in business and the people I talk to, they think a lot about taking their money with them when they leave the community rather than thinking about how that money came to be. And the fact that they didn't do it on their own, they had often when they own businesses, like Andrea was saying about her father and what he did for his employees. Too few business people realize that they don't make it on their own. They do it because of a lot of help. Mm-hmm. And the monies that they made in this community. And for some reason, they don't, if they're aware of that, they ignore that. So those are two related things that I would change, and Elaine would change too.
Yeah, one of the things that Monica and I get to do, as part of our, jobs, which is pretty great, is getting to hear donors talk about what's important to them, all the time. I'm wondering, from the panelists here, when you talk about we talked a little bit about how you did it with your children, Andrea, but when you talk about, giving and giving back, to the community with your friends, how can the, is there things that we can do as a community or as a community foundation that might be able to help you in that regard? Or what are the things that, you found to be successful? What are the things you still need some, that are still stumbling blocks per se?
I really enjoyed what Vicki said about that notion that you need this pile of money sitting around in order to create a fund or make a difference. And that's, I think, a misconception that's held out there. So that's a good way to put it, Vicki, is just you don't have to start with the tree. You start with the seed and move it forward. So I think that's an important conversation and maybe a misconception about how people perceive the community foundation.
Thanks for saying that, because that is something that we, I think an opinion or a perception out in the community that we try to overcome. And we have so many different ways that people, we can connect people with the charities and causes that they care about. So I hope that shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, can I say something? Being that we're one of the seeds, as Vicki puts it, and I love that, Vicki. Thank you so much. Being one of the seeds of the community foundation, working with PEG, and being in the inner city and asking, approaching the foundation, and how PEG was always more than willing to assist or give us something to work on, be on different types of what was that we on, Peg? We were on some other kind of committee that we were on where we had to get the grant money, had to sit through 6 weeks of something. And it was just, that was fun. But you got to learn a lot from the different parts of the community. You know, if you only see a certain side of the community or in your head, the one that you create in your head about the community, you'll never get to really see what's really out there in the grassroots of it. But what Vicky said, Vicky, I think because you spoke so highly and so great that this is why we piggybacking off of you, is that the empathy is what we need to see. And what does that look like? Everybody has a different approach to what empathy looks like and what it is. So I'm with you. We moved here over 30 years ago now, almost 40 years now. We've been here in Syracuse, and it's just like, for me, it was kind of, for me, it was difficult because I wasn't used to such a closed mind people. And I'm sorry to say that, but I find that the people here are very like closed in their thinking. So I came from a real broad way of thinking. And it's like, okay, so I had to realize, and it took me some time, took me some years to understand that I thought differently. So with that, I kind of, you know, massaged my husband a little bit to get him to see some of it. But yeah. But with that being said, the wand, if we could just, as this community that we have right here, if you can just reach out, show empathy, as someone said, one of the panelists said, is that we have to be honest. And what I find is that we're not honest. And I like what Steve and Elaine Jacobs said, is how things change over time. And as things change over time, the needs are different. I can't go back and say, we did Kirk Park over 20 years. I can't go back and say, you know what, CNY, I need you all to fund our Disney trip or help us with our Disney trip. That's not important right now. You know, the food bank is more important. The people who want to stay in their living quarters is important. To be able to pay their bills, to be able to be with their families. Mental health is important right now. So I can't say I need you to help me with that was 30 years ago, you know, 20 years ago. So I really hung on to what Steve and Elaine said about things change. And the needs change. So I would like to see that field of interest grow, where we grow and build that up as a foundation. Different parts of our groups that are here, that we will look into that field of interest, because that's what I believe that will help our city grow. I'm going to look into it.
That's great. Really good points. Any other final thoughts from our panelists? You've shared so much already, but I don't want to, it's almost like I don't want to let you go.
I think we've all learned so much from each of you today. And, you know, I'm sure if we listen, we could do the same thing with all of the attendees today and learn about their giving traditions and their story around giving. And so this has been wonderful. And I hope that this inspires everyone to share their giving story with others. And, you know, and you can see, you know, what a positive impact it had just by, you know, sharing it here with this smaller group. So, so I look forward to that.
Yes, thank you. And for everyone else who joined us today, if this has prompted some questions or ideas, or you want to learn more, or you want to kind of pick apart some of the things that we talked about today, we'd love to talk with you. We welcome those conversations. I've added our email addresses for me and Tom in the chat, but any member of our staff can help you, and our staff is listed on our website at cnycf.org. We would love to hear your giving story and hear how you want to change our community. So a final thank you to Elaine and Steve and Andrea and Mark and Carla and Vicky. Thank you so much for your generosity today. And we appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
sunny day, everyone.